differences in views and
By the
opinions.
way, I'm not. Oh, we are streaming live.
We just went live.
Oh, okay.
All right.
So here we are. We're up and live.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to the DKP. We've got a guest tonight is my aunt, Tammy Swartzendruber JAH, and she's gonna talk to us about some of her work, and we're going to talk about current events and how to discuss or how to cultivate relationships with people we disagree with. So we'll be covering a range of topics tonight, and I think it's going to be exciting. So,
is anybody headed to DC for the inauguration?
Nobody
far
on.
away.
I canceled my trip last minute.
Yeah, me too. So you're the only one that's close enough to do it easily, Matthew.
Yeah.
You kind of let us all down. So yeah, I thought we'd open up with and Tammy, just tell us what a little bit about your work and what you're excited about right now. I know you run a academy for like learning challenged kids. I don't know how you would phrase that, but that's something I'm really interested in. I had the opportunity to visit it just briefly once several years ago, and I would just really have loved to hang around and learn some more. So that's what I'd like to open with tonight. What got you into that, and what you do, and I know that's not all you do, but I think it's a big part of your life that
It is
our
pretty much
listeners
all
will
I
be
do.
interested in. Yeah. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Well, so what do you want to know? Like how I work? Just explain that I'm working with the kids.
Yeah, and maybe what I'm interested in knowing why you got into that. It wasn't something that you trained for earlier. It wasn't like a career choice of yours when you were younger. It's something you chose to do more recently and really have poured your heart into. And why is that? What did you want? Why did you want to do that? And how has it gone?
Yeah, well, teaching has actually has been a career choice of mine. I just didn't know that it was going to involve teaching children with learning disabilities, because in the 60s and 70s, you didn't really have a lot of children with learning disabilities. We had dyslexia and everybody knew about that, but you didn't have all this autism and sensory issues and all the things we've got on it. You didn't have the spectrum then. And I've known since second grade that I wanted to be a teacher. And my mom kept the teacher was Marla Martin from Pennsylvania that taught at our Mennonite church. And she called the stories compositions when we were students. And I wrote a composition on when I grow up, and I said I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to work at an orphanage. And so I've known since second grade, I felt this burden. And I began teaching in 1979 and have been teaching in some capacity since then, except for 1982 when Rochelle, my daughter, and Anthony, the year Anthony was born, because of the, having the baby then. When I had my other children, I still kept teaching. So basically I've been in education for about 41 years.
Wow, and I didn't realize you had been doing that like that much of the time.
So I taught school in the Mennonite schools in substituted in Mississippi because my sister was teaching down there. And but I taught school. I was the first year CLE was rolled out. I was on the bottom ground floor of CLE. I taught first grade in Canaan, Indiana. And I had 4 learning disabled boys. And that was really probably the catalyst when I first thought, wow, I really feel like I could work with these kind of kids. So I had those boys in Canaan, and that was in 79. And then I also taught in Pennsylvania, Marvin King was the pastor up there. It was Northern Pennsylvania, Sand Lake or something like that. And then after that, it was teaching in Baptist schools. And our church school has 400 students in it now. And I taught in our church school for a number of years. I also taught homeschool, and then I also homeschooled my children and homeschooled other people's kids. And then I had a daughter who had a sensory processing disorder, and we didn't find out till she was 10 years old. And I just knew that she was struggling to learn. She had all sorts of odd idiosyncrasies, like not eating food with lumps in it, and screaming when she had too much stimulation, and pulling away, going into her room right when she had a play date, all these odd behaviors. And when she was the spring term of her 3rd grade year, my husband and I went to a parent conference, and I had known this. My husband hadn't. He wanted her in public school, and she couldn't read anything. She knew the word the, how to spell it, because it was in a song they sang, but she couldn't read the word the. She couldn't read dog or cat. I mean, when I say she couldn't read. And she was so frustrated. She'd cry through school. She'd come from the bus home and scream her whole way home. And I finally realized that I had to bring her home, stop everything I was doing, and homeschool her. And when I left the school, the public school, I had had dealings with them since my daughter Rochelle had been in the same school years ago. And there's a 14-year difference between those two. So it was many years ago. So I've got Rochelle at 38, Annalise just turned 24. And then I have Wally, who is 19. He's my only son, and he's at Ecola Bible College right now in his 2nd year as a ministry student at Ecola Bible College, which is out here by the Pacific Coast here in Cannon Beach. So I brought Annalise home and taught her at home. And as I pulled her out of the public school, the principal told me that he was going to follow me, because our Oregon state law says homeschoolers have to pass the state test at a 15 percentile. And if I couldn't get her to do that, then I would have to put her back in school. She couldn't even read a state test. And so I just looked at him, and I was just like, well, you can follow me all you want, but where's your criteria? She can't pass this 15 percentile now. So I took him home, and the state kind of followed me for a little bit, but pretty soon they just let me go. And I saw through her, and through the weeks that I sat in on school, there were a lot of kids in the classroom just like her. And my heart just went out to these kids. And as word got out that I was teaching my own daughter at home, and people knew I was a teacher, so they started bringing our children to my house. And thus we formed Blueberry Tutoring, because I had like 15 blueberry bushes, and my house was painted blue, a deep denim blue. And so we went with Blueberry House Tutoring LLC. I set it up as an LLC, and it was a tutoring company that still exists today. I owned the tutoring company, but the tutoring became 2-hour homeschool classes, and then it went all morning homeschool classes. And finally, there were just too many students coming in. And my son, who doesn't have any of these problems, was getting very upset at all the people coming through his house. And so I counted, and in a week's time, we had over 100 people coming through the doors of the house. And so the school was upstairs. So I went, yeah, it's time to find a place. So I moved out of the house, and then the school just began to grow. And then I renamed it. I renamed it to Northwest Heritage Academy. And now I'm going to be 61 this spring. So when I finished up my I was 59 years old. I said to my daughter, I said, the older one, the one's Anthony's age, I said, I can't do this anymore. I called her in the dead of night. We talked all night long. I called her at 1. We were talking till 4 still, convincing her she needs to take the school for me. And she is not in education, but she is a much better business person than I am. So she's all about business. She owns several companies. So she took over the company, and now I'm still working in it, but I don't have to deal with the IRS and with, all the irate parents. And I'm administrator of grades K through 6. And my daughter graduated from Blueberry House, the one that had all the struggles. She graduated. By the time she graduated, she was grade level on everything except vocabulary was very low and still is for her. It still is low. I bet if she took a vocabulary test today, it would probably be at about the 6th or 7th grade level. But that's not, it's low for like our family and for, do I dare say it, intellects, although the newspapers and everything else are written at an 8th grade level. So it's not that low for normal reading, for reading fun, not profound reading. Get what I'm saying? Okay, leave that one down. Got it. All right. So she's fine. And and many times parents want to actually meet her before they put their students in. And I don't know what they're expecting, a monster or something, she's just like very normal. She's getting married in September, and she is catering coordinator at Chick-fil-A. She has not gone to college, but she just got a scholarship, and they're sending her off a $1,500 scholarship, and they're sending her off to leadership training. They don't know anything's wrong with her. I can still tell it, but her peers and things don't get it anymore. They did when she was younger, but not anymore. So through her, I learned a lot about working with kids. And as the school grew, those were the kind of students that were brought to me because everybody knew my struggles with her and what her struggles were. I also became a writer for Gator News, which is a online publication, which is for sensory kids. I write curriculum for students who have learning disabilities, no matter what it is. I formed this school, and in the school, every student works at their own level. So if we have a student who is 4th grade and can do pre-algebra, he does pre-algebra, but if he can only read at the 2nd grade level, he reads at the 2nd grade level. There's now 72 students in grades K through 12. So we do the homeschool transcripts and everything for them. We run 4 days a week to stay within Oregon state law because we are a tutoring center, and we cannot offer the exact same hours, exact same curriculum as public school, and without having to fall under their rules. So it's formed as a tutoring center still. When my daughter took it over, we cut off my Northwest Heritage, and she renamed it Northwest Heritage Learning Center so that we could stay open through COVID. So it harkened back more to a tutoring center. We didn't follow the school rules. So now it's just a learning center, and everybody's setting up learning pods all over because of COVID. So it worked for us. And then, and so the school continues to grow. Right now I'm 4th grade teacher. I have 10 4th graders. But in the 4th grade class, within those 10 students, I teach every subject in grades K, 1, 2, 3, and 4, because of all the different learning disabilities. And my granddaughter, who is 17, Rochelle's daughter, she is aide to me. She, runs all my errands, runs the Starbucks for me and things like that. So this is what I'm doing, and this is how I became interested in this work that I've basically given my life to. And my husband has totally supported it financially and in every way. I managed to, before I retired, and gave the business over, I managed to pay him back every penny that I had used for startup costs. So, but it's not lucrative, as private schools are not. But I'm glad my daughter was able to take it over. But this has been my life work, my life calling, and this is where I'm having trouble retiring because I thought I would not come back. I can't leave it alone. I just feel like it is one of the gifts, that God has given me, as the gift of teaching. And I just don't feel that the calling is lifted from my life. I just don't feel the call to retire. It's a heavy, heavy burden with me all the time for these kids. So during the summer, I tutor, and we switched all our tutoring through Zoom now for online tutoring. And once school starts, I give that to subcontractors of mine that do the tutoring. So
is that tutoring, do you do that anywhere, or that's just local people? That's your regular students that you're tutoring?
No, that's before COVID, when we were in-person tutoring, it was all of Southeast Portland. Some of them would come from Vancouver, which Portland's not too far from Vancouver. But now that we're online, distance doesn't matter. So they come from all over for online. Most of my tutoring is public school students. It's not, private school or our school. Right. It's usually public school students. So, and this year I could be making literally 5 times the money if I would have not worked in the school and just tutored, because so many people need tutoring because of the online learning and distance learning and hybrid classes and all. I could have made way more money, but for me, it's never been about the money. My heart's with that school, and I did not want to. It struggled with the with the turnover, and now with COVID, I was just determined I had to hang in there and make sure this thing went. I was not going to see my life work just come to a screeching halt because of the transition and because of
Right.
COVID. So yeah, that's where I'm at today, and I have no idea how long I'm going to continue, but I can tell you that working with fourth graders all day is very wearing on me. I had been for the last 12 years teaching high school and junior high writing and literature courses while I was administrator and on the company. So now I'm with the fourth graders, and oh my goodness, take me back to high school.
That's a really neat story. Dave, you do some work with learning disability, don't you?
Yeah, I work primarily with dyslexia, raising awareness in Mennonite and Amish schools about dyslexia. And then I often recommend the Barton system. I don't know if you're familiar with Susan Barton, the Barton
Of
reading and
course.
spelling system, but that's, I figured probably, but that's
Yes.
a major thing that I recommend. And there's a lot of schools. I've been doing it for, well, it's going on 10 years now
Oh,
that I've
really?
been doing that, and I've been surprised at the opportunities. There's they rented, this was early on when I started doing it down in Davis County, Indiana. They rented a like a, I guess it was an auction barn or something like that for the event, and I probably had 200 or 300 Amish come to listen to me speak on dyslexia. And
Wow.
so it's been really neat that I've been surprised at how many doors were open. I actually was up on Vancouver Island. There's a nationwide church up on Vancouver Island that I was up last February, right before COVID. I was up there for about close to a week and working with the school there. So that's kind of what I do with that.
Do you stick just with the Barton, or are you like doing Orton Gillingham? Um,
I stick with Barton. I'm mainly like, I don't actually do the tutoring. I'm ADD and I don't have the kind of focus that it takes to be that, because that's extremely precise. So my
yes.
thing is more consulting, and this is what you need to do. And so I don't even do the heavy lifting as far as even teaching someone how to do it. I recommend get the training here and do this, and it's more like a resource and a kind of a bridge between what they don't know and what they need to do than actually providing the services themselves.
Is it to schools, to the teachers, or are you going to the parents, or how is that?
It depends. Sometimes it depends on what the contact is. A lot of times it's through the school. Like a school will come and ask me to speak to the patrons about it and kind of community awareness. And then I also got Susan Barton did a training for how to screen for dyslexia, and so I do screenings too. So they have me come in and do a handful of screenings, and then give recommendations for how to help the students and so on. So
Do you
it
feel
kind of,
like, have you followed up on that? And do you feel like the Mennonite nationwide, those kind of churches are actually, are their teachers getting training in that?
they
After you,
are. I've heard a lot of really good reports. I've had some that are kind of that they don't see the results because they're not as careful as they should.
Mhm.
But a lot of the people I've worked with, they have really been able to see some major differences. I had a father call me, um, this has been a couple years ago now, but called me and kind of, you can just hear the tears in his voice, telling me how his boy wouldn't look at books, had no interest in it. And he said now, after, it was probably about 6 months later that they'd started the tutoring, he said, we have to go up after send him to bed to make sure he's not reading under the covers with a flashlight.
Yeah,
And
see,
that's just that's just an example of a major change. I had somebody call me a couple weeks ago just saying the change that their child had, and how now they're being asked to speak at a teachers meeting to give their experience. This is what my child was dealing with, and this is what we did and what helped and so on. And so it's really exciting to see that, because you know how stringent the system can be, as far as, you know, if you don't understand, well, you must be a bad kid, you know,
Right.
and to see those eyes open and to realize and to make the connections, this is something these students can't help. You're able to really then to tap into the compassion and I mean, it's not always, but I've had some uphill battles, but I really feel like we've been able to make a pretty big difference in the last 10 years.
And that's what keeps you going. And that's like why
Yeah,
I can't
absolutely.
quit, you know. I just
Absolutely.
every success is just when you get discouraged and there's a kid who suddenly sees the light, and you know, it's like, whoa, there's and the light bulb never truly goes on for learning disabled students, but
Mhm.
you measure it by little, you know,
Yeah.
tenths of centimeters, and eventually, you know, you take them as far as you can. Yeah, that's kind of exciting. I didn't know there was anything like that within the Mennonite church. The Mennonite
Yeah, I
churches,
was
they
up
keep
in
that.
I was up in New York, the Finger Lakes area. There's the Weaverland Conference is a lot of churches up there. And I went down in the basement of one of the schools there, and they had a little room in the corner. So you could tell it was an addition, you know, that they'd added on. And it had they had a little sign on next to the door that said something like our Barton Reading Corner.
Oh, that is cool.
And that realization, I did
Yeah.
this, I made this happen. It was really cool. It really feels like you're making a difference, not just for the 1 or 2 children that you worked with at the time, but the fact that you've opened a door in that community
Right.
that they know what to do when they run into certain specific issues.
Now you don't have to answer this, but but you can choose to. Do you get paid for what you do, like for speaking
Yeah,
engagements?
I do. I have a fixed rate for my screenings that I do. And then most of the community, if I come into a teacher training, I have a cost per teacher. But then like my community talks and those kind of things, I always do this on a donation basis.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's for the community. But if an individual
Right.
school wants you to come in, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I handle it. I have and I'm a teacher. When I started doing it, I kind of looked at it as something to support my teaching habit. So that's I taught for 7 years, then I took a break, and now I'm back teaching again. So it's really nice. There's actually been years where it's been close to a quarter of my income, so it really helps supplement the teaching.
What do you teach?
I teach at our Mennonite school, so I teach 7th and 8th grade, all subjects.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite level is junior
Funny, that's
high.
really funny. It's this year I have 10 students, 9 boys and 1 girl. So that's
Yeah,
fun.
that's yeah.
So
That's
you
my. Of course,
said,
I'd sooner see what.
go ahead.
Well, I'd sooner see the 9 boys and the 1 girl than 9 girls and 1 boy. Girls, junior high girls could destroy a school, literally. You know, they're just so catty and so,
Yes.
you know, hormonal, and have so many splits between them, social splits, and then moms get involved. And yeah, I about crashed my school over too many girls in junior high.
Yeah, I know.
It was the
I
worst.
know that.
It
Yeah,
really was the worst split we ever had.
So,
That's really cool.
just a quick question. You said you were in Canaan, Indiana. So, like, I taught with one of my co-teachers, Marla. I forget what her maiden name would have been. Marla Bear now. That I think she was from there. I don't know if you know her or not. And Alan Troyer, I think, taught there at one time. Would he have been there the time you were there?
Well, I would have been there in 1980, 1979, 1980.
Okay, that would
The
have
thing
probably
is,
been long enough ago that she would have been very
yeah,
young at
it
that
was
point.
it was set up at a double wide trailer house, and Bontrager, he now has a church in Washington. Ron Bontrager from Indiana.
Okay.
He and I were co-teachers there, and like I said, we were on the ground floor that year. I think there were 66 schools in CLE at that time in Canada and the United States. So it was just like getting off the ground. And I was so proud of myself and very thankful to God, because I went to the CLE teachers meeting in Minnesota, and where all of these CLE heads were people who wrote the curriculum. And because I had first grade, learning disabled students, they had told me, when I went there, I found out that they came to me with it at the end of the conference. It was a 2-day conference there, and someone from CLE came and told me they were offering me all sorts of opportunities that I was too young. I didn't want. Now if these opportunities would come, I would take advantage of them. But I just didn't. It was too many things. So like to go places and to help, because my students were ahead and a better grade room average than the guy who wrote the first grade curriculum. He was teaching the first grade curriculum, but my students were further into the curriculum, and it was fall, late fall. And not only were they further in, the preacher, what do you guys call him? The bishop or whatever of Canaan, Indiana, was Levi Mast. And he had already sent all this information up ahead. And and he told them that it was with boys who had learning disabilities. And so I had all sorts of opportunities within CLE to go all over. And no, 19, 20, I just wasn't going to do that. It was just too scary, to be so far away from home and all these things. I just didn't realize, I didn't know enough, really. I think they probably figured I knew more than what I knew. It was just simply that I think when you have teaching as a gift of the Spirit, when this is one of your gifts, I think that you could go to school and have all the letters after your name, and that's not what's going to make you a teacher. Right. It really has to be something that is a Spirit-filled thing. It really has to be a calling on your life, not just a job. So I never followed up on that, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Are you aware that CLE is actually working on an OG-based reading curriculum right now? It's in development.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they asked me to do some consulting on it because of my background with it, and so yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. They're working real hard to they aren't billing it as a completely OG, like here's what you can do for a child that's severe dyslexic, but they say there's a lot of children that are, you wouldn't say they're dyslexic, but they're kind of halfway in between.
Yeah.
They're not. There's nothing. It doesn't seem like there's a lot out there for something. It's either full-blown intervention or just mainstream, and so they're kind of trying to create something in the middle that children that need more intensive phonics practice, but not necessarily a full Orton-Gillingham, attack on the problem. Will be able to use this curriculum.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Dyslexia is not considered a learning disability because it is brain, how the brain thinks. Right. So it stands more on its own. It's not considered one of the learning disabilities, and that might be what you're saying is, these children are truly not dyslexic. It's more of either haven't had the correct teaching or the correct method, but it's more of a lag in comprehension and a lag in being able to work with the phonics and being taught it correctly. Because full-blown dyslexics, as you know, if you're dyslexic, we used to think it was reversing letters and numbers. Now we know it's a full brain experience. It's dyslexic in all areas of your life, not just academics. And it took them a long time to come to that realization. But yeah,
can you explain that a little bit more? What do you mean by that? Because I was still under the impression that it was just a reading issue.
Oh no, dyslexia means that you actually think in a whole different way, and your thought processes, even your memory is often affected by dyslexia. I actually went to a panel at Oregon Health, OHSU, here up on what they call Pill Hill area in Oregon City, in Portland, where they have all your medical buildings and they train medical students. They flew in doctors and people from England who had worked on the cutting edge of working with the brain, and their panel experts, they took straight here from Oregon. I guess it speaks to people more. The one they had the largest law firm in Oregon. The other one had the largest banking firm in Oregon, and I cannot remember what the third one was. All three of them were law firm and banking. I don't remember the other one. all three of them were severely dyslexic. So to say how that affects you in all of life, the lawyer said and he's like was 50 years old, has to go into a courtroom. And if he's in a new courtroom, he said he'll go in 10 to 12 times before he has to go, and he'll sit down where he's going to sit and then walk up to the podium. Then he'll come back and then he'll walk to where the judge is and he'll walk to the bathrooms. He was that dyslexic. It affects everything you do and say, and your numbers, the way you speak. Many times you'll find people with dyslexia reversing words. They'll, of course, reverse numbers. The banker ran the largest banking firm, most successful, largest banking firm in Oregon. He doesn't even work his own numbers. He just sits there and rattles it off like it is just almost impossible to understand him. So his aide, and he just does staccato like numbers. And the aide just types all this in and gives him the figures. And, because he can't even, if he tried to put it into a calculator, and he'd reverse it. And so it was just going to show that you can get on in life severely dyslexic, and that it affects everything. These were grown men. So it affects your whole life. You see things differently. You comprehend differently. Of course, it affects your phonics and your reading. It affects your ability to do math. And like I said, many times you can tell by speaking to them. A lot of people who are dyslexic will not use really like compound complex sentences when they speak. It's just too much. They'll mix it up. They'll dangling modifiers all over the place, and you can just pick it up after a while. And so you don't really find severely dyslexic people clamoring for the limelight, but a lot of them are, because when they're successful like that, because it just gives so much hope to others. But they're doing a lot of studying on the brain right now, and they no longer class it as a learning disability. It's just another way to learn. Because you can actually be trained out of dyslexia, and if you have a learning disability, you have it for life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Can I ask you a question about that? I actually worked in the developmentally disabled community for a long time. Starting back to my youth, we had a special needs school next to my elementary school, and I got involved with peer tutoring all through my own education. I worked with the special needs classroom, and then my first work out when I graduated from high school was in group homes, and then we did foster work and was back in children's care facilities later in my life. So I have a long-standing, love for that community and for the needs that are there. Being that you work with learning disabilities, it seems like we've come a long way in how we're viewing these things. Like even that notion of dyslexia being much more comprehensive than a reading issue. Where are the places where, as a broader community, we still need to grow in understanding people with these special needs, and how can we be better at adjusting and caring for our neighbors with these kinds of difficulties and issues? Are there foregrounds of that issue that you know of, and because of your profession?
Well, I'm mostly in the private sector, so
right.
I'm really not a community person.
Right.
Believe it or not, Anthony will not believe this, but I do have this shyer side of me that kind of, or maybe I shouldn't say it's shy, maybe it's doubting myself still a little bit. So I don't really get involved in that type of thing, but I can tell you that like what's happening, in the community and on the front of all of this. But I can tell you that I am so glad to hear that David is doing this in the Mennonite and the private schools there, because that is really where the lag is. Our public schools are really very aware and are making a huge emphasis on that here in the United States, and I don't, of course, know worldwide, but I do have a lot of contact with teachers from Australia, and they have a very keen awareness of this too, but they have cutting edge programs for this that private schools we don't have access to and don't have the funds for. So they are really working with it, but I don't think there's any, like at my school and at your basic Christian schools, funds are always an issue. And I don't think that we're doing enough for these children. I doubt, in the public school, even though they have all the things to do it, I think that they're not using it properly. They've got all these funds and all these programs and Title I, which gives them extra funds depending on the amount of low-income students in their schools. And there's a direct correlation between learning disabilities and low income. And I know the low income don't like to hear this, but there is a direct correlation between that. It's been proven with lots of data. And so your Title I schools get the money to work with these programs, but I don't think they're even using it effectively even then, because I see these kids that come in from public school. And when we get a hold of them, we can do better with our little, Stone Age type things we do than they could do with their high tech, So as far as what the communities are doing, well, yeah, making an awareness, like programs that, like that panel that you can go to and learn from. There's classes at the colleges that you could take, and everybody seems to be tuned into dyslexia. What they understand less is dyslexia and ADD and ADHD are the three things that parents and everybody seem to know that affect learning. What they understand far less is sensory integration, sensory processing, auditory processing, how that affects the student. And so those students just get labeled as, used to be Asperger's. Asperger's is now considered junk science. They used to get labeled as Asperger kids or having autism and on the outer rings of that. And I don't even think that's fair to these children. I just think that there's not enough awareness of these. The public school will call these children the trackers because they track them on through. Whereas if you're dyslexic, you would not be a tracker because there'd be a program to work with you. So they're trackers. They're also called crackers because they fall through the cracks. They're also called the shadow children. And that's because they survive there in the shadow and just get pushed on, just like my daughter was. Those are the kids that I wanted to reach, were those shadow children, not the true, like real special ed that would qualify for special ed. We don't work with those. We work with dyslexic students, but we do not really advertise for dyslexia. My work is more with the ones that were tracked through or the ones that are back in the shadows, really without any diagnosis. Everyone knows there's something wrong, but they don't know how to fix it. And because that's kind of where my daughter was. So those are the kids we get. We don't get like the behavioral issues, which they try many times to do, but to give us, but we don't get kids with behavioral issues. We get 75% of our school has, the students have ADD or ADHD. And that affects learning, of course. And the public schools really aren't dealing with that at all because their classrooms are too full. But really, I'm dealing more with just that kind of, that part in there that isn't truly autistic. Well, some of them are. We have some diagnosis of autistic, but not the head banging in the corner, not speaking kind of autistic kids. We're not working with those. And we have, I would say probably 15% are dyslexic. And I think that the reason largely, because we do not, advertise ourselves as Orton Gillingham or, Barton or any such program. So I think largely we're affected in that because I train all the teachers, but also once you get those students into a small setting, where there's all this one-on-one teaching and everything's taught at their level, you can fine tune your program to work with those kids. And I think that's where our success is. Not that none of my teachers right now have any credentials in dyslexia. They just have dyslexic students and are successful because of the training to work with students who are learning differently than other students are. And so that's really our focus, isn't dyslexia, but we get those. Yeah.
So are you familiar with Barbara Aerosmith?
The Aerosmith program?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that something you
Don't ask
work
me about
with? Or... Pardon me?
I hate the Aerosmith program. I do not like the Aerosmith program.
Okay.
No, I get kids that have spent 3 or 4 years in the Aerosmith program, and I get them. And Aerosmith is more like working with the brain and reprogramming. Is that the program you're talking about?
Right. Basically she used some of the, it's a lot of the methods she used with herself to to help her develop processing
Right.
speed and those kind of things.
But what happens is parents pay so much money for Aerosmith programs that some schools will do that, like charter schools will do that for a source of funds. So they'll put in an Aerosmith program. That was my phone and my bell at the school. Somebody walked by my school door. They'll put in these programs for money, but then the students just spin their wheels there. And I have not seen one student come through that program and having changed them. I just see parents funneling money through that thing, and then they're in my office crying because their kid's been in there for 3 or 4 years going through this program and not seeing changes. Largely too, because when a school gets that program in there, the students are taken out of mainstream, and therefore they've already been behind. Now they're put into this program that will work with their brain and to think, different ways, to learn different ways, but they do not continue their education at the same level. So they fall further and further and further behind. Case in point, right now I have a 14-year-old boy who I actually tutored him when he was in 1st and 2nd grade. They are now back to us when he hit 7th grade. This is his 3rd year with us. At 7th grade, they finally called me to put him at school. He had spent the intervening years, 3 of those years, in an Aerosmith program, and she had written me about, and I told her not to do it. She did it anyway, just desperate. And he is working at about a 2nd grade level right now. At 14, I firmly believe, yes, he has developmental delay, but I firmly believe that if we'd have had him all that time and forgot that program, that if we'd have had him all that time, I really think that he would have excelled by now. I think he'd be further on, because we've seen that in just the 3 years that, well, 2.5 years that we've had him. But now he lost all that time. But I'm sure that, it may be how it's implemented in different schools or something, and I know she claims it really helped her. I just see parents with no money just so desperate and paying into that program, to help. And Brighter Minds is another one that's really popular, and they actually put, the electrodes and nodes on the brain and, convince the parents to watch the screen, and this is happening. Okay, so that happened. Then what do we do with our kids? It's like, it's really, there's so many things out there that parents in desperation race after and just will do anything for these kids. And it's just not helping. What they really, I am convinced that when any child truly needs, you have the children with global developmental delay, what we used to call retardation, they don't give a diagnosis of that anymore. Now just the car's carburetor or whatever, whatever that thing is retarded. So funny. I hear my husband working in the garage, and he'll call to my son, no, it's still retarded. And they're working on the car, and I'm like, oh, I just cringe. But that group of people are now called, get a diagnosis of global developmental delay, which global means their whole body being the globe. They're just delayed, coordination, everything. And those students, of course, will not excel like students with just a learning disability diagnosis. But I find the biggest factor in the success of these children is parenting. And no one can convince me otherwise. I've seen it in 41 years of education. The kids that you would think would be the very worst at academics, reading social norms, like autistic kids can't, do that. The very worst of those. You can get them from a home that mom and dad have been fully aware of what's happening. There's structure in the home. There's expectations from that child, and there's discipline of that child. And there's feeding the brain at home, where they read stories to them. They talk about intellectual things. They discuss things. That child from that home, that's where your success lies. And then, man, if they can get that along with a school like ours, you have got a successful child. And I just feel like if it's missing at home, I don't think that you can do much with it. I really don't.
You're saying that even in case of severe delays, parents providing expectations of behavior and those kind of things help to bring the that, whatever you want to call it, performance level or their ability level up, just simply because it's expected that that's what they're going to do. And then obviously
Exactly.
with that, it's going to be the training to help them,
Exactly.
because
That's the
it's easy for parents to look and say, well, he can't do it, so, and then you end up perpetuating it. Is that,
right.
am I hearing you right?
Exactly. For example, last week, I mean, I have very updated examples because I'm in this daily. Um, I had this boy, so it was, the kids had been working really hard. And so I had had my teacher's aide order in Wendy's Frosties. Only 10 kids, 99 cents for a Frosty. Those Frosties are not on the main menu. You have to know about them. They're 99 cents. And I kid you not, they are about a quarter of a cup of ice cream. They're so small. And I had that brought in. So one little fourth grade boy who is working at a first and second grade level and who has extreme ADHD said to me after he ate it, did that have sugar in it? And I said, yes. Well, I'm not supposed to have sugar. I said, well, you should have told me that before I did that. I said, we don't have that in the office on your paperwork. And he goes, well, when I get home tonight, my mom's gonna be so mad because, and then he just took off running in the classroom and he goes, I'm going to be zooming this way and zooming that way and banging my head on the wall and just, I just can't think. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Isaiah, let me tell you something. You can control that. No, I can't control my brain. When I get sugar, my brain controls me. That's not something that a child says.
Right.
That's been told them. And then he said, I said, well, so you're not responsible for what you do when you have sugar? Nope, I can't control that. I said, so what happens when you're 16 and you've just had an ice cream cone and you drive by the car lot with all those beautiful shiny cars and you just decide you're just going to steal one because you're not responsible. The sugar you ate is. Who's going to jail? You or the sugar? Oh, Mrs. Jada. And he rolled it. He threw himself across the table. Oh, that's so funny. Sugar going to jail. I said, who goes? I said, you do. That tells you you're responsible. Well, sure enough, I got an email from the mother, and no, a telephone call. And she said to me that she's very disappointed that I gave him sugar. I said, then you need to write that, on the records in the office on his forms. We have nothing here that says he can't have sugar. And so, having been in this field for long enough, I really wanted to hear what she had to say. I said, so tell me what's happening at home because of that. She said to me, he's zooming all over, he's banging his head into the wall, he's running all over, and his whole brain just boggled. This is a record that this child has played in their head because mom tells them that that's what's going to happen. Now, you take the child that doesn't know what's supposed to happen because of having sugar. And I know I have low blood sugar. So when I get sugar, I fall asleep. It's just, I get migraines, I fall asleep. Yeah, things happen with sugar. I know that. But it was almost like I had just pressed the button on a cassette tape recorder, and just played back what the voice said.
It's a training. It's reinforced behavior. Not saying that I'm saying there's not a connection between sugar and the other, but when you give somebody a blank check, well,
so they have all these behaviors and then they don't know how to deal with them. And on the extreme end of that, they're put into behavioral schools, which we have one right down the road from my school, and they call us all the time. What ends up happening, okay, these children that not children like him with the sugar, but I'm like children like my daughter that are the shadow children. What they need are, I didn't even know sensory issues even existed. And I had a very popular weblog at the time when weblogs are fairly new, people, mommy bloggers weren't all over the place. And so mine was quite a successful blog at the time. And a lady on there, a girl on there, she was actually only in her 20s, says, you know what, when you talk about your daughter, it sounds exactly like my sister, and my parents discovered she had a sensory processing disorder. So I looked it up, and it was just my daughter just all the way through. And then what I did was we took her to a hospital that had a child development program, and you had to go there for 8 hours. And they put them, she saw 5 different doctors, therapists and doctors within that 8 hours. And I got to watch through a one-way window and to see what she was doing in there. And she worked one-on-one with each therapist and with the pediatrician. She hadn't even gotten all the way through her first doctor or therapist before a nurse came to me, and she said, well, I've been watching everything on the computer. And because as these therapists work with them, they type into the computer, and then they have the children, do things, look at these pictures and do things. And she said, we've already got a diagnosis. She said she has a sensory processing disorder, but they still took her through everything. But hers was so severe that they caught it right away. I've had other people that I have sent up there, they come out and the diagnosis is, we don't know what's wrong. But my daughter was just so fitting, every item on the list was checked for her. But so armed with that knowledge, I went in and did deep studies on this, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on what to do with these children. And that's where I ended up with the school. So I didn't go to college. It was all my own research on this that made me set up this school and taught me how to work with her. And it was just time consuming, and parents do not have the time, being 2-parent working families. And a lot of them are just throwing their kids at the school and trusting that the school knows what to do. And the school oftentimes has no idea what to do with these students. You have to train these kids with sensory issues that are on the autism spectrum. It's not like you teach other kids. And students learn, children in your home, they learn by looking at the other kids, and they learn by looking at you as dad, what your facial expressions are, that you're mad, that you're upset, that you're happy. They don't read that. Their world's just a flat world. And so you really have to train them. And I hate to say it, but you almost train them like a dog. Like your dog doesn't understand everything, but when you say sit, he sits, that's kind of what you have to do with these children. And that is heavy, heavy parent involvement. And like with my daughter, I didn't even let her go to someone else's house to have, after school for a snack or whatever until she was 12, because she did not understand even what the expectations would be. So in their own setting, she can sit at the table, pass the food. She knows, to pray before she eats. But when you get to someone else's place, they get overstimulated with the new environment, and then they do dumb things. They just start repeating words over and over, or talking really loudly, or jumping all over. So I had to show her how to sit, what the expectations were at the table, and you just train them, and here's now when you take your fork, you wait. It's just every single step is a training that you do not have to do with other kids, with your other children in your family. And that's why I say the kids that come out of these homes where there's this intense teaching, it doesn't matter if their learning disability is far worse than the kid who has barely any disabilities, but they're behind in school enough that we know there is a problem, but their home is messed up. It's almost a losing battle. I firmly believe it starts in the home. And structure, schedule.
Oh no, I've seen that. Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, well, this has really been interesting, and I think we're about 10 minutes past the hour, and I'd like to pivot a little bit if we can. I think it looks like there's some people in the comments that would love to engage with you further, Tammy. But maybe at some point you can follow up on that comment thread. But
do I see the comments on my end? I'm so used to being a host. I don't know what happens when I'm not.
You know what? I think that you can see it under the live stream, but that's up to you if you want to do that after we log off. But I did have some questions related to that. We were going to pivot to current events a little bit. The one thing I wanted to ask, and you've done a lot of talking now about these sorts of things, and maybe you've covered this question, but I was going to ask, what is something you've learned from your work with kids that you wish more people knew? Like, what's a key thing that you find people don't understand? I imagine the last principle of the importance of the home is one of those big ones. Is there
It
something
is,
else
yeah.
that comes to mind?
That I wish that people knew about that. Yeah, I do wish that people understood that. I think that parenting, if they don't understand, they should do parenting classes. I think the Mennonite Church is really good at doing that. But like I said, that is really, really huge. What happens in the home, and with the demise of the structure of the family today, 2-parent families that have to go to work. I think that's why we're seeing more of these problems with these kids. So Bill, basically, your question was, again, what did you ask me?
Yeah, what is something you've learned from your work with kids that you wish more people knew?
I wish that they would understand that if they're seeing a problem, like if they know that something is wrong, or they have a sense that something is wrong, that they would that they get help for that. Don't keep, like, I have no idea where you guys all stand on corporal punishment or your audience, but if you spank a child with a sensory disorder, you've just added to the sensory part. So it really is not helpful. And you're usually spanking them in the middle of whatever it is upsetting them, and they're not able to sort it all out. They're not focusing. They're so into themselves, and their brain isn't functioning correctly. And then you're spanking them yet on top of it. I wish parents would understand. And if you see something going on, seek help for that and find out, and don't just resort to this discipline right away, because it really just adds to your problem. Now, I have spanked all my children, but I look back and I can see discipline that I gave to Annalise that I was wondering why nothing was working, and it was only escalating. And my dad, being a very authoritarian parent, of course, I adapted that kind of parenting. My husband's a much gentler disciplinarian than I am. And I wish I would have known that, so that I wasn't spanking her for disobedience when it was not something she could help. It was, had too much sensory things coming into her brain and wasn't able to sort it out. The spanking is not the thing to do there. In fact, the best thing you could do with these children is leave them alone, send them to their room, put them in a quiet place. So, and let them wind down, because almost at that time, any intervention is not going to work. You just keep them safe. And then when they come out of that and they're clothed in their right mind, not running around like little devils in them, you speak to them, and then they can understand what you're saying. Not that they will remember it, because they have sensory processing. But my daughter right now, she is very functional, very normal, but it just took a lot of work. And I guess I would say my things that I would say are paramount. And again, even the discipline harkens back to the home. The home is where this all is. Teachers, therapists, doctors, they can only do so much. If that home is not structured and the parents are not together on this, and it's not, just a complete and whole home where wholesome, the foundation, everything is, it's just a losing battle with these kids. So I just want parents with those children to not be so quick to use the rod, because that's a sensory feeling, and all it is doing is adding to the sensory, millions of sensory things that are coming into their heads. It's like they're not going to get it.
Piling more on when there's already an overload.
Yeah, the reason they're acting out is they're already overloaded. Now we've overloaded them more, and it's just ineffective. And that's one of my big regrets of not having Annalise, knowing what was wrong with Annalise, because I just saw it as disobedience. And after I learned how to work with it from my hours and hours of study and talking to behavioral therapists, which I don't totally go along with everything they said, but everybody learns their own child. And after that, I was like, I've often said you could spell motherhood GUILT instead of motherhood, but that's one of the things that really bothers me, is that I would like other parents to steer away from. Get a diagnosis so you know what you're dealing with. And I think that
and I hear you saying, I think that a lot of us need a few more tools in our child training toolkit.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
There's in certain cultures, there's really a tendency to just fall back on physical
Mhm.
discipline for whatever is going wrong. And it's
Mhm.
just, there's nothing in scripture that suggests that that's the solution to all problems with
Well,
children.
it's most interesting. My dad is, which would be Anthony's grandpa, will be 81 in May. And I sat down and asked him when my mother was dying, I don't know, I don't know when she died, 8 years ago or something, maybe 10. But during that time, we were sitting by her bedside, and she was not cognizant of anything going on, and so we just had a lot of time to talk while we're just sitting there with her. And I just asked my dad. We got into some deep things about the family and all, and I just had this burning question, and I was just like, Pop, tell me, why did we always get spanked? Why were there no timeouts? You know, Making the punishment fit the crime, the things that we know and are trained on now, we were just all the time spanked. And he got really thoughtful, and he said, and that's kind of something I think I've been harboring a little bit, even as an adult. It's like, I feel like I got spankings that were not justified, but everything was spanked. Everything you did that was wrong, you got a spanking for. And he said to me something that I just thought was so profound and goes along right with what you're saying, Anthony. He said, Tammy, and he was very thoughtful. He wasn't just off the cuff. He said, we didn't know what else to do. That's all we knew for discipline. So there's what you're saying is there's just a lack of tools. And of course, back then you didn't have all this timeout, and you didn't have, parents' choices. Now they give choices, and it was just spanking for everything. And after my dad said that, then I don't know why I couldn't think of that myself, but then it really hit me. Yeah, it's not really his fault. That's all he knew. Whereas now, we can't ever say that's all we know, because we have so many resources, a huge one being the internet, where we can find and studies have, progressed. Like if one of us children would have had a sensory issue, I don't know if we'd be alive today. It would just be disobedience the whole way around, So I really think we need more parenting tools, and we need to look at why, and not just discipline in the moment, even though we're taught not just when we're angry, but I think you need to look at the child and their anger, and not discipline when they're angry. I think disciplining a child when they're angry is not helpful in any way, whether they have a sensory processing disorder or not. It just makes them more angry. And I just think we need more tools on how to deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
More skill and,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
More
a better
understanding.
a better understanding of how children grow and develop and how their minds work,
Right.
for sure.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Segues right into the second part of the conversation that I was hoping to have tonight. I wish Matthew was with us. His computer froze up halfway through, so that's why he's not here. But he was going to try to get it up and running, but it doesn't look like it's happening yet. But what I was just thinking about this ahead of the live stream, and wondering, are there other principles you've learned in some of the things you've discussed there? Do you think they give us insight into communicating more broadly with other people who speak a different language, spiritually or politically, than we do? How to connecting with people who are, who are wrong, or who are doing things that are destructive, and who have a really different way of looking at the world. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well,
I mean,
Anthony,
we all run into this on a regular basis. Hey, there's Titus. I think he's on his phone in his car or something. He's in a dark world. But
oh
yeah,
yeah, I see it.
so yeah, I mean, you and I have some really strong differences, but we run into people. I mean, this the times we live in. We get to encounter people all the time that just really see the world in really radically different ways that are hard to get your head inside how they can think the things they think. So yeah, do these principles translate into those kinds of situations in ways that we could act on?
Well, if you're talking about dealing with somebody who is radically different in thought and all, in their belief system, their political viewpoint, yeah. I guess the thing I've learned is, okay, listen, everybody has some good in there somewhere, including you, Anthony. Um, you know, I also think that I've pondered long and hard our relationship, Anthony, because you, when you wrote these questions here, had the question, and let me just get this directly. You said the talking about things that discuss that you wanted to discuss. You mentioned something. I'm just not seeing it right now, but something about
Friend or relative with sharply different views from you.
Right. Oh,
and,
you knew
and what
exactly why you put that in there.
Well,
Yeah.
it actually wasn't meant to refer to our relationship. I thought afterward, you're probably going to think that's what it is. But like, we all have multiple people like that. And not every, I think in the times we're living in, not everybody even has anyone whom they actually like and respect who differs from them. Like, we're so siloed, but I'm guessing that you have people like that and that I'm not the only one. In fact, I can think of other family members, and probably living in a place like you live in, there's some divergence of thought among your circle of friends and acquaintances and your network. So yeah, anyone you have in mind, it wasn't meant to be specific.
Well, I can tell you one thing, that actually loving someone, and I'm sure this is why Jesus put to love your neighbor as yourself, but loving someone really makes you want to understand and hear them a little better. And I think that's where I'm at with you, Anthony, is I tell all my nephews and nieces this, that Anthony's just my favorite nephew. And I think there's that. Now he's grown into an ideology, grown up and has an ideology and a whole different view on life that is just like troubling to me, because I'm just like, oh, Anthony, do not go off the deep end here, but
Too late.
Because
too late for that.
What were you saying?
I said too late.
I know I should have followed you more closely when you were younger, more pliable.
When there was still hope. Yeah.
So I really think that yes, I deal with atheists all the time. I even have a student in my classes, atheists. I deal with those parents a lot. I have a friend who is an atheist. So I actually have close contact with Wiccans. You're talking about different ideas. I mean, I'm talking about far out, on the spectrum there. And really, my principles of communication that I use with them, I don't know if you even call them principles of communication, because it's basically just let them talk. It's like you cannot. This forum is set up so that you can talk about your views on things, but your normal conversations are not set up that way. So it's you could just come across as arrogant, as hot-headed or whatever, if you try to instill any common sense in these people. So if we're talking about with the atheist, if one of the things we have a problem with in our school, and so you're wondering how the school transfers over to that, in the school we have a problem because we teach science from the creation standpoint, from the biblical worldview there. And that is really hard on parents. And so, yes, what I do when I deal with these kind of people, and mostly they're in my work, they're not really, one's a friend, but that's a friend that just became a friend because she was married into distant relatives. And so I really don't try to bridge that gap. I listen to them, and I know everybody thinks I'm terribly opinionated, but in 60 years, you do learn a few things. And one of those is when to interject your opinion and when not to. with the family, I don't think I've learned that yet, but with other people, like in the business world and all, and parents that I deal with, there's just a time and a season for,
Yeah.
and they're so quick to tell you, even like working with their children, I get the emails on exactly how I'm supposed to handle their child and what I'm supposed to do. And he can't, don't make him pray at lunchtime. And can you do this? Can you do that? And I just know through all the years that I'm not going to have a problem with that child if mom just lays off. Sure enough, my little atheist boy is praying and doing his thing now. And it's just because it doesn't mean he believes. He lets us know all the time that God isn't taking care of him, or that God's not going to answer the prayer. But he goes along with it. He doesn't need all the pullouts that mom thought he needed. So what I'm saying is, your question on how I bridge that, just very professionally. Because I don't have those people close in my life that are that far out. Anthony, the closest person to me, with the most divergent views, is you and your family.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, and so it's been, I've done a lot of soul searching during these COVID times when I've had more time to be on the computer, and thinking about things you say and all, and views. I've listened to this podcast several times, and I realized that I think it's funny how I'm 60 and I still have to come to terms with some of this stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, I've kind of gone through my 40s and 50s without any new thoughts and ideas on what I believe. I've just been very comfortable in it. And now spending more time listening and reading up on things that other viewpoints, whatever, I'm finding that, whoa, maybe I'm too comfortable in what I believe, and maybe I should give more time and thought to other people's views and other people's, what got them there? Why do they believe that? Actually, I've been exposed to some Christian views during this last year that I never even knew existed. I didn't even know. This is going to sound really like I'm not even in the spiritual realm, but I didn't even know anything about this whole thing that you guys are talking about, where it comes to Jesus going to the poor and working with the poor. And after there was a big conversation, I think on your Facebook page, Anthony, on this, maybe it was your mother's, and how our responsibility, Jesus, is to the poor among us. And without that, that the thought on the Facebook page of whoever wrote was more like, that I got out of it was more like, that is what is the most important in our lives, is taking care of the poor. I had never, ever, ever even contemplated that. And although I argued it vehemently on that Facebook page,
Yeah, as one does.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that specific conversation. I just said as one does, though.
Yes. But I did privately research that and really looked into it. And I don't think I believe it to the extent, I don't think I came to the conviction to the extent that a lot of you have it, but it was just a whole new thought to me. And so I started looking at things. I'm like, oh yeah, Jesus really did, but I don't want to go too far there, or I become, a socialist, leftist.
Well, I think that's that polarization where, like, if you adopt views that are unpopular with a particular camp, well, then you're automatically that camp, part of the other camp that's an enemy. Like, that's one of the things that I think is really pulling society apart, is because we're so afraid to believe anything that sounds like the other, that the question stops being, is it true? And becomes, does it fit my tribe? And yeah, that's, I think, a great reason to have conversations across these divides, because, that's something that if we're forced to be liberals, for instance, if we're going to be pushed out, I'm a social conservative, like in virtually by any measure. I believe marriage is between one man and one woman for life. I'm 100%. I think abortion is a horrible, crying evil. And there's virtually no measure of social conservatism that I wouldn't tick the box for. But if we're told that to believe this one or two things makes you a liberal, well, then you end up, by a lot of people, I think, end up feeling like, okay, these must be my people. And that's like, leftist politics is not Christian any more than I think far right politics is. Because like Jesus taught about more things than just how we treat the poor, for instance. Like that's but it's good to understand that when people on the left are claiming, Jesus is on our side, it's because he did talk about those issues, and they're latching on to them and saying, oh, this is something Jesus talked about and you're ignoring it and we're not, so we're right. They're ignoring other things that Jesus spoke about. And ultimately, let's just follow Jesus. And I think that we can, I think there's a lot more common ground I found with people when you get them kind of off by themselves. Like you said, that Facebook battle dynamic where you're in the public square, and all your friends are watching and you're duking it out. Like, there's a lot of face saving that just has to happen in a situation like that because of how our brains work. And when you sit down over coffee with somebody, it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
You can't turn each other into an abstraction of evil nearly as easily.
But we're freer, as everyone knows, we're just freer to say things to each other on the internet that we would not say sitting face to face. The keyboard is, we've got all that between us. But you did say, when really it just gets down to like Jesus' teachings, but that sounds really simple. But there's a lot of it's not just that simple, because everybody reads differently what Jesus' teachings are.
We all bring presuppositions to them from our upbringing or whatever. And there's things that Jesus said that if you understand first century Near Eastern culture, all of a sudden, they pop with meaning that you didn't know was there. And so, it's a lifelong process of learning to understand him. And it's not like we need all of that background in order to obey, because a lot of things are just perfectly clear.
But see, you think it's perfectly clear, but somebody else might not find that perfectly clear. Like, obviously to you it's perfectly clear that Jesus was like, really went to the poor and that was his ministry, or if I'm interpreting that correctly. That's not like so clear to me. See what I'm saying? We read the same Bible. Well, I don't know what version you're reading, honey, but I'm reading the King James.
Okay, so I've read several different ones, and we won't go into the details on that. But if you read the King James, that's common ground for most of us. We can all agree on that. What's in the King James is probably true. So if we, and I wish Titus was here, because Titus has this concept of mere devotion, which is basically, here are the things that all Christians agree on. 6 points, I think, and I don't know if I can name them all here, but it's like evangelism, prayer. I'm going to get it wrong, but the scripture. I think service to the poor is one of them. I mean, that has historically been pretty broadly understood by the church. Even today, most churches have some sort of outreach that's responsive to that sense that Jesus does care about the vulnerable.
For
and
sure.
So there are a lot of those things that you could find, a Christian anywhere on the Christian spectrum. They pretty much agree that some of those basics are, a key part of Christianity. So when I say things are perfectly clear, those are the things I'm thinking about. I know we have a lot of disagreements around the edges, but it's worth noting how much we really do all have in common still. But
well, see, what you said about churches, that's one thing I think that the Baptist church independent churches that run the Sunday school buses and you know, yeah, they do. And I've been there for 26 years. So yes, they do go into the highways and the byways. It's just that and they care for the poor. We have like the clothes closet, and the largest food bank in Clackamas County is at our church, you know, the outlet for that. And we bus in 500 to 600 children every Sunday on our Sunday school buses. And we have programs where we go in and we just go down to Skid Row and just load up homeless people on the bus, bring them in for a meal all the way in, you know, which is like a 20-minute drive back to our church. And so yes, we do things like this, but we don't hear our preachers, we don't hear over the pulpit that it's just really not taught that Jesus is concerned with the poor. I mean, we, like you said, every church just kind of has that. That's what basis of Christianity. But your level of that, Anthony, is different. Like the way you guys bring that out is you're putting a much higher priority. Like his whole work was that, from what I was getting in that conversation, and that is not, you know, that is not the way that we basically view it. We know that there's poor and we help the poor because that's the thing to do, but we don't put it at that priority. You get what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, I'm it's interesting to me that's I wish I remember the conversation that we're discussing, but you know, I certainly would not say Jesus' whole work was, you know, aid to the poor, particularly not material aid to the poor. Although he did a lot of this, you know, hanging out with down and out people and blessing them, and you know, his followers were known for that from the start. In fact, one interesting thing, an early Christian quote, I don't remember who said it, Matthew might remember, was when the pagans were accusing the Christians of not supporting the gods because they wouldn't go to the temples anymore, and like the whole system of nationalistic religion, the civil religion wasn't being supported by them. Some of the same accusations that people like me get today, in fact. But the one of the Christians responded with this quip, you know, if Jupiter needs more funds, he should sit out by the street as a beggar, and then he'll get money. The point was that we're giving to people that need it all the time. So beggars know that they can count on us to help support them. And they could say that and know that their enemies didn't have a response to that because they were known as those sorts of people. So that's, you know, there's that really kind of this was definitely an integral part of what Christians did, but it wasn't that your material needs are the whole deal. It's that, like, there's a holistic, I know I just used a liberal word there, but holistic in the sense that it encompasses everything. Salvation is something that renews the whole world, the whole person. And so part of that is meeting each other's material needs and not need, you know, I can trust you. It's easier for me to trust you that you have something to offer my soul if you've demonstrated you care enough to meet the needs of my body. Right. Matthew, you looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry I dropped out. My computer froze up on me, and I had to work my way back in. But it's an interesting conversation because when I grew up in the Baptist church, we had ministries for the poor, and there was a general concern for those things. I think that my experience in the fundamental independent Baptist churches was that those things were a part of being a good human. Like, they were like, don't steal and don't tell lies. They were just a part of being a good person. I think what changed my paradigm is in looking at the New Testament and seeing what the function of ministry to poverty actually plays in the gospel narrative. Like when John's disciples come, he's in a prison cell rotting away, wondering if he made a mistake, and he sends his disciples to Jesus and they say, "Art thou the one, or look we for another?" And there's three confirmations of his messiahship, that the blind receive sight, the lame walk, and the poor have the gospel preached unto them. It's a part of who he was. And
now, see, there's where it's at. I don't know what you're talking about from your church, but when you said like you do it because it's part of being a, it's the poor having the gospel preached to them. Like when we bring them in,
right,
they have to hear us. They have to hear the plan of salvation taught before they get fed. So I think that is a big. I think it'd be a. I was sticking up for the Baptists here. I think that would be a disservice to say they're just doing it because it's what you do as a good person. I know for our church, my church has about 2,000 people in it. For my church, it's more they're doing it, and it's 100%. They're doing it to teach for the present the plan of salvation to them.
You're right. That's a mischaracterization. That's an overstatement. But I didn't see the poor as valuable to God. I saw them as people that needed help, and maybe that's more what I'm getting at, is that the poor become the central thesis. Like Luke 6, the Sermon on the Plain, it says, blessed, it doesn't say blessed are the poor in spirit. It says, blessed are ye poor. It's a different sermon. And he's in, and I think the point that I had missed for a long time was the great inversion, that Jesus was flipping the world upside down, that for all of human history, we were all trying to get to the top, and Jesus is reversing thing and says, everything that you guys have esteemed and valued, I'm running it the other way. Like, you go to the bottom of the pyramid of humanity, that's the people who I'm interested in. And so that framework was pivotal to me when I began to embrace a new, when I came out of the evangelical world, which you and I are crossing different directions, but when I came out, it was some of those realizations. And then Peter's, with the Jerusalem councils, their requirement to endorse Paul's ministry as he was going out was that he should not forget to minister to the poor. So it does become a central thesis for who the Christian people are. And I don't think it's primarily about meeting needs. I think it's primarily about two things. I think it's about reorienting Christian people's relationship to stuff. One, that's on the side of the church. And on the side of the world, it's about inverting what we esteem and what we think is important.
Yeah.
And James talks about that too. He gives that scenario where a wealthy person comes in and you give him the best seat, and you're so glad he's there, and come back again and see us, and then the poor person comes in and you give him a spot over by the side and keep him out of the way. And like, that is just the way people are. That's how we are by default. There's some kind of halo that forms around someone who's wealthy. And we just value them more. And that's like fundamentally in a pagan society, that's the way it is. And so there's something really counterintuitive about that idea that we're all elevated to equals. In fact, Jesus seems to, pronounce special blessings on the poor for all, reasons that we could conjecture about. But yeah, I think that inversion is a really important thing. Like, the world really is upside down. And I think there are things that, maybe things that we can only understand if we've been poor, if we're in that sense of vulnerability and need in some really, or if we have close relationships with people who experience that.
Anthony, are there any poor in America? Are there any true poor?
Yeah.
My answer is
yes.
no. No. My
Well,
answer is no.
Well, you would need to define poor before you could answer that question.
I think when Jesus says go to the poor, I don't think that we have a concept of what the poor are. All of our poor have government programs put in place for them. So yes, they get, one of the reasons we have so many poor is largely alcohol and drugs. And their choices have made them poor in America. I do not, and I know lots of people disagree with me on this, but as I watch things go along and happen in life and with the people, I'm like, you take a missions trip somewhere, and my son went to Nicaragua, and our pastor and a bunch of people went over to the Philippines several times, and to India, not to where the tourists go, but deep into the country. the poverty level there is just unreal. Here, okay, maybe this is okay. So when I left the Mennonite church, I had no idea what life was like outside of the Mennonite church. It
Mhm.
was the only way I can say it is I was up in the mountains, away from everybody. It was a big thing to go 7 miles into town to the little town of Estacada with a population of 900. So what happened is when I came out of the Mennonite church, it was like learning another culture. It was as if I would have came from, you know, Korea or, somewhere. I learned a different culture. And it
Right.
was shocking to me. I didn't know they have a whole language that they speak in the world that we didn't speak in the church, and another way of dressing. And it was just shocking to me. And then I'm thrown into college on top of that, of my own choice. But here's what I want to tell you that maybe has colored everything. I was in low income housing, going to college. I didn't know even government programs even existed. Why should I know that? The Mennonite church, we were poor, very poor in our standards that we have here in America. And, the 50-pound bags of cereal said right on them, unfit for human consumption. It was horse food and we ate it. It was like we were poor. And I, poor by our standards, not poor by third world countries. And I found out about all these programs. I just marveled at all the government programs that were put in place for people who were low income. I grabbed a hold of those programs. Now, to me, I don't like someone coming in from another culture, no idea what to do. I moved out of my parents' home with a rocking chair and a sleeping bag and a $400 old green station wagon. I forget what it even was. But anyway, and just thrust out here to make it on my own. I was able to take advantage of government programs, get my textbooks paid for. I got grants from the state under the hardship rule that this college had in place, because my parents, I think it's 3 years, that they claimed you have to be 3 years at that time free of their taxes without them putting you on the taxes. So basically I could not go to college without them paying for my college. Well, when I told them they would not do that because of religious reasons, they didn't want this higher education. They said, well, that's just a hardship clause right there for religious reasons. And so I ended up getting all these grants and things to help me through. But let me say that one of the things that I researched on my own and found was that, wait, well, the government's providing housing. You don't have any money, you can get a place. I paid $7 a month rent. This was in the 80s, but even that's incredibly low. I paid $7 a month rent for my house. I got $90 check from the government to live on for the month. And I got food stamps of $350 a month. And it was that and my school loans, and I was a single parent. So I had this 3-year-old when I started college. So then I had daycare, figured out the state would pay for my daycare. And while I went to college, I held down 3 part-time jobs. One was writing for the college newspaper. Another, I was a columnist there, the only paid columnist on there. The other one was working for my parents. And while I was going to college, I took a 3-day course in Beaverton down here to be a professional nanny. So I worked as a professional nanny for rich people at Lake Oswego, multi-million-dollar homes, and worked weekends in the catering business and wrote for the school newspaper to support us, along with my $90 check and my school loans. My school grants. I would leave my apartment in government housing in those fall mornings. There would sit those, and I've been told I'm judgmental for this, but I'm telling you, this is what I saw. There sit those parents in their on their porches smoking. Their moms are in their robes, their gowns, and the children are running around in underwear, not dressed, and clutter everywhere, and they're yelling at their kids. And I'd go to school and I'd work all day at school. There was a campus daycare for my daughter, which too was government funded. And so I only had to pay like $160 a month for daycare. When I would come home after, and college was hard, you guys, I didn't have a day of high school. So we're not talking someone that was just like brilliant and went from, 12th grade straight into college. No, last I had gone to school was 1972, and we are 12 years old, and we are now at 1986. And yes, I had taught in private schools during that time with my 8th grade education. But what I'm saying is, I went there and I'd work hard all day to understand what kids were just like totally getting from high schools and public schools. And it's all new to me. And I didn't even know that anything about in terms of Japanese Americans. I didn't really know the Vietnam War was going on. What was going on when I was a kid. I didn't even know this stuff. And so all this was just brand new. And I'd go and I'd soak this all in. And I carried 17 to 22 credit hours with a GPA of like 3.5. One term I really tried for 4 point and I got it, but I felt like I had neglected my daughter too much to do that. So it wasn't that important for me to get the 4 points. So I didn't try that hard again. I just stayed kind of with that 3.5 so I could get into universities. And then I'd come home and I'd walk right past those very same women in the doorways, the very same men in the doorways of their government funded housing, still smoking their cigarettes and snorting their drugs. This is what I'm telling you. This actually goes back to the home. I can't even tell you how firmly I believe the home is the basis of everything. These people, many of them were 3rd and 4th generation welfare people, or even beyond that. There they sat living off the government. And I can remember one lady, especially every morning, there you go again. She'd say to me, there you go again, off to college. Where do you really think that's going to get you? And then everybody would laugh. I just, keep walking. One time I said, well, it'll get me off my porch anyway, and that didn't go over very well. But okay, so then I graduate, and I can tell you right now, there are 2 people. We're talking the 80s. I was in my 20s. I'm now 60. There are 2 people that are still, I know for a fact, are still in that housing development. Why? Our poverty is a chosen poverty in the United States. They are choosing that. If I can come in with an 8th grade education, no idea of how this world functions out here. For example, the college counselor that, took me in for admissions and called me in, he asked me, okay, so let me see your transcripts. I'm like, what's a transcript? I'd never heard of it before. He just looked at me, what do you mean? I go, what's a transcript? Well, then let me see your GPA. I don't know what a GPA is. Well, how many credits do you have? I've never heard of a credit. Well, then did you get a GED? I don't know what a GED is. And I mean, this just went on until he was just baffled. I'm like, okay, stop with throwing the letters at me. I want to go to college. And he said to me, how do you think you're going to go to college when you don't, and by then he had found out that I didn't have any high school or anything. He goes, how do you think you're going to go to college? And I said, I'm going to go to college because this is America. And in America, we can do anything. So you are going to put me through college. You are going to tell me how to go to college. That's why I'm here. And he said, you know what? He said, I hear you. You're right. This is America. I am the one to tell you how to go to college, and we will do this. And we did it. And I went to college. That's what I mean. I just haven't. And I almost said the wrong thing. Let me tell you what I almost said, but didn't say. I have no sympathy for what's happening. I didn't say that. I almost said it, but I just
Tammy,
don't have
you've said 2 contradictory things to me. You've said that there are no poor, and then you explained how you were exactly the poor that those programs were designed to help.
I said America poor. I'm poor as far as America goes, but that's not poor.
Well, why is it not? I mean, what would have happened? What would your life have been like without those programs?
I would have had jobs that I would have been able to get into, that would have paid a decent wage, where I wouldn't have needed these programs to support me. In other words, I think that our jobs,
they weren't necessary for your future success?
I have not used my college at all for future success. Not at all.
The other
I
thing
thought
that
that was the
seems
route I had to go.
the other thing that seems self-contradictory about your statement is that you said that the home is the key. Well, you came from a very different home than those people that were next to
Yes.
you.
I knew you'd
If
pick
the
up
home
on
is the key, then those 3 generations of being in those environments is poverty.
what that is deprivation. What it is okay, I actually know a girl who has 6 children, each from a different father, each spaced 2 years apart. Because when you're 2 years old, your child's 2 years old, you've got to start looking for jobs in the state of Oregon. Back then, that was the rule. I don't even know what it is now. But when your children were 2 years old, you had to, like, at least 6 places you had to, put a job application into. And you had to go and start thinking about going to work. So every 2 years, she had a baby. And she made no beans about it that that's why she was doing this. Now, this is what I'm saying. Yes, I came from a decent home. And that is, I had someone tell me just this week in this very same type of conversation. And she said, yes, but you met your husband and married him, and he was influential in lifting you up to where you're at financially and successfully today.
After the government programs did.
After the government programs. So see, there's always, but here's the thing. I met my husband because I had gone to college, and remember, I did work in college. I did work through that. But I met him because I was in college. I met him because, and I still had the choice to say, no, I'm not going to date you. No, I'm not going to marry you. Even though I married him, and yes, it bettered me financially and gave me a different social status. And he helped me through a lot of this transition. It still was my choice to marry him. I'm still making a choice. And what I'm saying is, with these government programs, these people are making a choice to stay there. When you go to the Philippines, they don't have these choices.
I disagree with both of those statements.
I'm sure you do.
I've worked extensively in Uganda, and our community is in a neighborhood that is not where white people are. We live in a Ugandan community. And I've worked with a lot of people from that neighborhood who can't get over their gambling or their drinking addiction. But their gambling and drinking addiction is because their life is miserable. Well, that's the exact same reason it is here. I mean, people don't wreck their lives for fun. There are incentive structures that cause people to make the decisions they make, and that doesn't mean that there's not personal responsibility, but it means that that's not the only consideration. And if you look at your child born homeless in a New Delhi ghetto, or a child born in a ghetto in America on a couch with a different man in his house, in her house every week, and her mother passed out on drugs or alcohol, they're both poor in the exact same way. And they both have a broken life in the exact same way. And to tell the American child born in that home that they don't understand poverty, I think is totally missing the point.
Well, I would never tell the child that. I would tell the parent that. The difference.
Well, but what about when the child grows up and because of that lifestyle has made similar decisions?
Exactly. The parent might be a child like that at 17 years old. And that's the situation you're looking at. She was home trying to take care of her 3 younger siblings while her mom was passed out, and that's why she never got any schooling and doesn't know anything, and can't hold a job either.
Right. If she's still in the home, I'm talking about the child that is now an adult and on their own. For them now to be in poverty is a choice that they are making, because here's the difference between Uganda and here. Yes, there's the drugs and alcohol. Addiction is the same everywhere. Here in the United States, you have programs to help get you out of that. You have the gospel is everywhere. Churches everywhere. It's a salvation experience. You know about these things. You have the internet with resources galore to help you over this addiction. And most of all, you have access to the gospel, salvation experience, Jesus to help you. They don't have that in Uganda. That's a whole different thing. Here, if you're choosing this for your life, it's a choice. It's just a choice. You can to be an adult and say, well, it's generational. Well, get yourself out of it, for heaven's sake.
So there's
but
another point to be made here. I think also, like there's two claims that you're making that can each be addressed from both ends. I think they're both wrong. One is that the poor that we have in the United States, that it's fully a matter of their choice. Like that that nothing Jesus said about the poor applies to them because they don't count as real poor. The second one is that the poor of Jesus' time were radically different from the poor of our time in that way. If you think that's the case, go read Proverbs, which was written in exactly that culture, in exactly that place, centuries before Christ. It's full of exactly the things you're just saying to us. Like it says, I went by the field of the slothful man, and the wall was all broken down, and
I quote
thrown
that
up in weeds.
often. I
Yes,
quote
exactly.
that to everybody.
So like Jesus was steeped in this wisdom, and so was everyone in his audience. They all knew what poor people were like. Poor people are really the same in pretty much every age and place. You find the very same patterns, the very same generational sins cycles playing themselves out. And like you said, it's the child who has a learning disability comes into your school, they get a great education maybe from you, but they have parents that just don't have what it takes to give them what they need at home. And maybe that's like you said about my grandpa, because they don't know any better. No one ever gave them the skills. So that's a form of poverty that is much more impactful on that child's life than even monetary poverty. And usually I think in every age that the real poverty, the real poor, I mean the people that are really down and out are people who have, they have economic issues, but they usually have them because all these other things lie behind it. I'm not sure that it's really changed that much. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that allows us to kind of shrug off what Jesus said, because we're imagining that they had some kind of, shiny, precious moments, poor people, with sad eyes and a patch on the robe. And they were just little saints, but that's not how poor people have ever been.
No. I just don't think that there's another country, maybe Europe or something, that has so many programs to help these people if they want help. And that's what I'm getting at. I'm not saying that we shouldn't help them. Of course we should help them. Like I said, the church programs that we have, even me, I have stopped and bought a meal for someone that I've seen along the road, saying they're hungry with their sign. Being on welfare, of course, I met a lot of our poor people here in America, and I helped a lot of them. But I also know that they took their food stamps and exchanged it for drugs, and then came to me for food stamps because I knew how to use my food stamps. But then again, there's programs for them to learn how to use the food stamps and how to manage and I'm just saying, there's just such a plethora of information and programs and wealth of information here that other countries do not have, that I just don't see an excuse here to be poor. I see sin as a big reason why we have poor among us. And it's so largely it goes right back to what I'm saying, my church, how they reach the poor is bringing them to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, because the devil never wants you to get ahead in any way. He'd love to keep you at this level, ensnared in drugs and alcohol, so you're never effective at anything. And so there again, that's why the church's job is to go in the world and preach the gospel, free them from sin. And I think that when they actually get a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and the work he does in his life, and get involved, get discipleship, and get involved in groups that with Christian people, you don't see a lot of those kind of people out there homeless and on the streets and defecating on the sidewalks. And they're just really, what makes the difference is Jesus. That's the difference between third world countries and America even. And I know some of these countries, someone put in the comments that, yeah, Uganda is 84% Christian. Yes, okay. but that Uganda is nowhere near where we are at with our, I'm speaking at class levels, financial class, social classes. They've got their own caste system and their own classes, of course, but United States is leading. Well, who knows what's going to happen, but we are leading in all of this. And so Uganda is not close to where we're at. What I'm just saying is we've got a church on every street corner. The basics is we have poor, United States poor. This is my opinion. We have United States poor because of sin, and not because of we're not barefoot in the hills in some dusty, hill area and walk 5-10 miles to church. Hey, you walk out your door, you can find a church. It's like you can also find programs by walking out your door. I'll say it. I just really don't have sympathy for it. I'm sorry, I just don't. And I will help them. I don't see them as before.
Do you think that lack of empathy that people of your and my socioeconomic status have for poor people might have anything to do? This is a hard question, but might have anything to do with the fact that they're not flocking into the churches?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. Mine doesn't. I do believe that a lot of these pastors of these mega churches, it's like, what is their motive for helping them? Sometimes it is to get church members and to, benefit their church.
Well, what I'm saying is if we think the church has the answer, like what kind of orientation toward the poor is going to attract them? That's why we bring them.
That's why we bring them in and feed and clothe them, because that will attract them. Mm-hmm. And then we make sure that they hear the plan of salvation before we let them take them back down and Skid Row.
But it seems like your general disposition, and where I would, I do appreciate your desire to help people. That's obvious, and kudos. But I think the problem that from my perspective is that you still don't seem to be looking and talking about people in poverty the way that Jesus does. It's you're wrong. You have something wrong with you. It's all about your sin. And if you would just get right with God, then you wouldn't be in this situation. And I don't think that covers the gap that poverty actually lives in. Like when I see Jesus talking about the poor, who presumably have all the same problems the poor today do, he doesn't take that attitude. It's not a who sinned, this man or his parents. It's I care about you where you are. I don't need to fix you to care about you. I'm not trying to make you something different so that you have value. You have value as you are, right there, right where you are.
Exactly. I'm just saying that the reason we have the poor in America is due to sin and lack of knowledge of Jesus.
Presumably, we have the poor everywhere in the world because of sin. Like, I don't think that poverty could exist in a world without sin. Like, you wouldn't have it. Everywhere there has been poverty for all of human history, it's been because someone's selfish with resources. It's not because the earth is out of resources.
You have Christians in far deeper poverty than are sinners here in America. You have Christians in far deeper poverty in other countries. And what I'm saying is they don't live like those without Christ at that same structure. When I see poverty, I just okay, so when Christ comes in, when Jesus comes into your life, poverty is a whole different experience. Yes, you're poor, but I live right here by Portland with all this rioting, which is really, really just, tore down our statues, ruined businesses, many small businesses that might have totally gone under, never to reopen again. And through it all, the homeless people have been able to now they're just taking over because, there's huge homeless camp a mile down the road from me. Our freeways are just homeless tents and litter and just all this stuff. It's just like they're trash. They just throw it everywhere. Christians that are in poverty, their camps wouldn't look like that. they're cleaned up. You can go over there and you can see the communities where the Christians live versus where those that live that are down in addiction and drugs and alcohol. Same with over here. What I'm saying is that that's why I'm saying that Jesus makes a difference. But yes, you can still have poor Christian people, but they get delivered from addictions, and therefore they are end up being more successful, however you define success, than those who are still in sin. And that's how sin affects that. That's all
Well,
I'm
you're not
saying.
going to get any argument for us that Christians live with less sin than people who don't, who aren't.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I'm
for
just,
sure.
I just see, I don't know. I think my own experience with that, I'm sure, has colored how I look at things. And I see that my sister in the comments mentioned, have you ever taken a look at where you were when you met Greg and where you might be if he hadn't come into your life? No, I was, so she is basically telling me too that it's my husband. What I'm telling you is that I went to college and I would have had to use that college degree if I wouldn't have met him. Yes, I would have. But it was still a choice I made to go with him and to date him and to choose him. I had lesser people, ask me out on dates. I could have chosen those. I could be in American poverty today if I'd have made the choice to marry that other person. And so I just think that, I don't know, when I remember as a kid, we'd go down to the rescue mission down here, and you'd sit up on the stage and in the Mennonite church, you'd sit up on the stage in the rescue mission, and outside are the drunkards and inside are the dirty men and chasing bugs across their arms and smashing them. You can hear them pop from the, we were just fascinated as kids with all of this stuff going on. Windows being broken right in the middle of the church service because of drunk people in the streets. And that was my definition. That's how I saw poverty. And I never thought of myself, as poor, even though by world standards, we were very poor. I remember my mom didn't even have a pair of shoes. Like, we should go out and feed the pigs and she'd be barefoot. I mean, we were poor, but I never thought of us as being poor like I did the people down on Skid Row. They were the poor people. And now I look at this, there's all sorts of programs that weren't there in the 60s. When they're down there now, let's do something with them. It's like, oh, you guys are not gonna, I just don't like seeing them on the streets and everything. I just think we need more homes, more places for them, but then they don't even want to go in off the streets. They're making these choices. You open up a house for them. You have organizations come in, build houses for them. No, they don't want to go into those houses. They don't want to get off the streets. They don't want to change their lifestyle. They don't want to work. And I just don't have a lot of sympathy for that. So yeah, that's just where I'm at in that.
I do have a lot of sympathy for it. I was homeless for a time, and when I was first converted, I worked in the homeless community, and I have over the years. And the level of addiction, mental health disorders, and just broken, traumatic lives causes me to have a lot of sympathy for people that are living in those. And it's not that I don't understand that their choices are contributing to their situations, but it's not any different when I'm in Uganda. When I'm in Uganda, in the face of poverty, there are choices that people make that are not consistent with their best interests. I make choices sometimes that are not consistent with my best interests and my best future. So I think the pushback where I would love if I could change your mind would be in the sympathy component. Like they are sympathetic, and I think that's how God sees them. Here's the thing that I think about judgment. Judgment is not so much, I'll just tell you my personal philosophy. Judgment is a big, scary thing. And there's a lot of horrible things that are going to happen in the judgment. But the main overarching premise of the judgment, from my perspective, theologically, is not so much about who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. It's about setting the accounts right. It's about taking all of God's knowledge and comprehension of all the rights and responsibilities and privileges and opportunities and liabilities and hurts that people have had in their life, and drawing a sum line at the bottom of the life and saying, here's where you are. in relation to all those things. And our prohibition of judgment is because we can't do that calculus, that it takes the infinite wisdom of God and his knowledge of all things in order to make that judgment. And so when that God tells me to be sympathetic to the poor, I don't have the calculus to figure out what kind of trauma people have in their lives. I don't know their mental health state. I don't know why they're addicted to drugs. I just know that they're in need. And that's the thing that's supposed to evoke a sympathy response in me. And I know that you feel that because you wouldn't have done the things that you said you've done if you didn't. And to be frustrated with the situation that causes poverty, I think is a good thing. Like, we should want to resolve the dilemma. But to lose touch with the humanity of poverty, to lose touch with the sympathy, and my mother-in-law, you know, my wife ran away when she was 15 years old and lived on the streets. It was 96, those really bad floods they had in Portland. She was homeless during that time. She was almost underwater in a park. As a 15-year-old, she's probably 85 pounds soaking wet. Now, 15-year-old girls who are 90 pounds do not run away from home because home is a great place. There were problems, and that's a sympathetic creature, right? You see an 80-pound 15-year-old girl living in a park, and you know something's wrong. But her life could have gone so many different directions from there, and she could be so many different people than she is now. And I used to be very critical of my mother-in-law, that her home produced the environment that my wife ran away from. Even though she's a very kind woman and I love her very much, I used to, in our early years of our marriage, be very critical of my mother-in-law. And at a certain point, I realized I come from a very stable home. And I realized if my mother had been put through the situation that my mother-in-law had been put through, not only would she not have done as well, she would have likely done worse. And to consider her life from her perspective changed my analysis of my critique of her. And I think you can do that with any of these people in these situations if you take time enough to get to know them.
Okay, let me tell you something. I too have been homeless. It doesn't change how I feel about this. What I'm saying is, if I can come and into America, because I was in a subculture of America, if I can come into America and I can find ways to do this, sure, I never got addicted to anything. And I can find all these programs to help me. These people are poor today. I'm not talking about the mentally ill. That's a whole different, yes, I have great sympathy for the mentally ill. In fact, if you look at my Goodreads or Kindle library, you will find many, many books on mental health. I have a great compassion for people with mental health problems. I love the study of the brain on that and how that all works. And I have a lot of biographies and memoirs and autobiographies and scientific books on this. That to me is a whole different realm. Now,
Well, it's a huge percentage of your homeless neighbors.
not my homeless neighbors, but the ones down, yes, the ones in downtown Portland,
Right.
where we let go of our mental institutions and let them out and running around there. And I do have a great sympathy for them because they do not have a mind that can help them.
Right.
But you have people down there literally who we call poor and who are standing at the streets. And so we're handing the money out of our Cadillacs, you know, out to these guys in the street, when really all they're doing is taking them back to the homeless camp. And in the homeless camp, you've got a pimp above them all, and he gives it to him, and then he doles out. They've got their own little government structure going on, and we call them poor. No, they're not. They have figured out ways to manipulate the system, to manipulate us, and because we are basically Christian in America, it's like, oh, give. When if you watch, they'll go down and they'll get in some Cadillac somewhere and take off, or you know, a Mercedes Benz, and off they go. You know, I just think that not those that are mentally ill. I think they stand on a whole different thing. But even those who are addicted, their mind is warped now, but there's choices for them. If you're mentally ill or you're born with, you know, like as a special ed kid, you know, where you're born with delays, handicapped that way, that's a whole different scenario. But when you have chosen the alcohol and you have chosen the drugs, and that is why you are mentally ill, and that then that's kind of where my sympathy ends. And I'm sorry about that. No, I'm not. I know I love them as Jesus loves them. I will take the gospel to them. I have given them food. I have taken in toilet paper, the bare necessities to these kind of people. So I
Well,
still
how do you make the differentiation between who's legitimately impoverished and who's not? Like when
I
you
don't
got
think
somebody in front of
anybody
you.
in America is legitimately, I don't think anybody in America is legitimately impoverished
Didn't we
unless,
just vindicate the poverty of the mentally ill?
that's what I was gonna say, unless they do not have unless they're mentally ill or they're developmentally handicapped.
So
And
should we not help people unless we can make? I mean, should we not care about their situation? Should we
I
not have
care about it, like I
sympathy?
said,
Should we not
I
have
do
sympathy
justice.
unless we can make that distinction?
No, I care enough. Caring and sympathy are two separate things.
Sure.
I care, I don't have sympathy. So I don't have empathy for that, but I care. The proof that I care is that, like I said, I've taken very basic needs to these people.
Mhm.
And I've helped many people out just because my lifestyle, living in these government housing and all, during those years, I was just rubbing shoulder with them and I was forever helping them. Now that I'm better off, like we go to, we provide Christmas for my heart is with the college kids that are single parents because that's what I was. So we do Christmas for those kids. We take their name, go into their homes, give them stuff for their children and for the mom, even help pay for books. My husband and I do that here. I also give to missions overseas too. Um, so so I have a caring for that, but I don't really have. I still don't think they have a reason to be that way. Not in America,
It's
unless
interesting to me that the difference between your experience and mine. So both of us have come out of homelessness and deep need by American standards. And your reaction to that is, I made it out, so you can too. So get up by your bootstraps. And my reaction is, no, I totally get why you're there. I've been there. I understand it, and I understand the world that swirls around you. And maybe I don't know. We both came from decent homes too, but I think that maybe so there's a cycle of poverty, just like there's a cycle of
Mhm.
wealth. Um, you know, it's called the Matthew principle. It's an economic principle. We know that it exists. It's a principle of human interactions that the if you have advantage, you gain advantage in an almost exponential growth curve, and if you have disadvantage, you lose advantage in an almost exponential growth drop. Uh, and what I've seen in my life is that I understood that my choices, because I was much worse than my friends and my compatriots. Like, I had a stable home. All the rest of the people in my gang, they were a mess. They belonged in the streets. I mean, they were literally bred for it. I was very different. I was much more lecherous than my friends because I didn't need to be there. I wasn't treated that way as a child, and there was no reason for me to be on the streets, but I was. I very much made those choices. But I also knew that at a certain point, like, the experience that I always remember is like, I was working at a steel mill about a year before I got married. And we were kids, and we were carousing, we troublemakers, and we were skinheads. We were always in trouble with the law and everything. But I was a working class kid, and I had a job. I worked at a steel mill. So I didn't pay my insurance. So then I was driving to work, and I got a ticket for not having insurance. Well, I couldn't afford to pay it the first time. I can't afford to pay it now. So I keep driving to work. I get another ticket for my insurance. Then they suspend my license. Then I get a ticket for not having my license and having and then I get pulled over, and all this stuff. And all of that was my fault. All of it was my choice. But I also feel every bit of the people that are in those kinds of cycles. When you look up from the bottom of the well of your own making, and you say, there's no way out, I might as well just keep going down. And I understand how sensible a reaction to a bunch of bad choices and bad decisions and bad luck all conspire against you, and you finally just throw up your hands and you say, I can't ever get out. I might as well just do whatever there is to do.
Yeah, and I wanna follow up on that because I'm really big on like personal responsibility and stuff, and I think your story is really cool. Just simply saying this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make a go of it. You could have done a
Yeah.
lot of different stuff, but you didn't, and I think that's really cool. But I feel like you're kind of making a little bit of a drawing a little bit of a magical line. um we were talking earlier about you have a kid that grows up in a broken home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then they grow up, now they're an adult, now they're, let's say, 22. At some point suddenly they're responsible, and it doesn't work that way. I was thinking back to the beginning of the conversation where you talked about the fella on the school board because they wanted another voice, and you said, well, you just left the Mennonites. You don't just have a different perspective just 2 weeks later. And it's the same way when you grow up in that. Like your whole thing, I'm still, as an adult, and I grew up in a decent home, but I look back and I'm like, I got some philosophies from my parents or some ideas about the way the world works that mom and dad were just wrong about. And I'm 35 and I'm still deprogramming that and saying, you hear mom's voice in your head or dad's voice and you're like, no, that's actually not the way the world works. They were wrong about that. And I can't imagine how long you would have to spend if you grew up in a wrecked home like these people do, like it's your programming is wrong. Like you have to recalibrate everything. And I think it's easy to underestimate the force of gravity that's pulling these people down, that it takes some incredible will, not just a one-day choice, but to claw their way out and see the point. And I say this
Yeah.
as somebody who worked with mentally handicapped people, and you argue with them about the importance of making valuable choices, and they don't see why it's important because they haven't seen the payoff yet. We have a lot of people that aren't mentally ill that have just as much trouble seeing the payoff because
Yeah. And
it doesn't make sense. Like Matthew, well, why should I pay my insurance? Why do I need to do this? This is, that's going to mean 6 weeks not going out with the boys or whatever. And screw that. I'm not going to do that. If I need to sit in jail weekend, I guess I'll have to do that. And like this, it's just a different mindset. Like for me, if I had to sit the weekend in jail, that would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. I'd be horrified. And there's some people, it's just, well, if you got to do that once in a while, it's just kind of the way the world works. And it's like this growing up in that thing just wrecks the way your mind works, not your brain, the wiring, but your philosophy of
well,
life.
the wiring,
Yeah,
the wiring physically changes under
Yeah.
under
I
trauma.
guess
And
that too. So that's
the
where I see, yeah, it's not, responsibility is part of it, but if we can do something to help them overcome that gravitational pull, that's
Yes.
like they need that.
Yes.
well, and one of the most powerful things that a person, I think the word that hasn't come up here that we're kind of all talking around is hope, that's missing in these situations. If you have hope, you can that things can be better. If you believe that you have the tools to better your life, and I think that's where both Matthew and you, Aunt Tammy, were in this. You had been brought up in such a way that you both had hope. You knew that I can do X, Y, and Z, and my life will go in the right direction. People are in multiple generational situations where no one around them has ever had any hope that things can get better. And if you don't have that, like there's no motivation, and your brain actually rewires to just tell you, here's what you ought to do. Make a decision that gets you a reward you can count on. And the room I'm actually sitting in was occupied a couple of years ago by several years ago by a homeless family that we took in. And I mean, everything you're talking about, like this cycle was just unbelievably just distilled in this family. They had 3 children and were married, about 30 years old. It was an absolutely catastrophic situation. And we got in, deeper, earlier and deeper than we probably should have, because we're a little bit naive about these things. And all of you could see a million bad decisions, that they were they were spending enough money on cigarettes. They could have easily paid rent on on cheap housing. If they had just quit smoking. They were addicted to that. And, I try to help wean the guy off, and it wouldn't work. And these children are growing up in that, and, he was just horrendously abusive. And yet his wife, she had no place to go. Like she herself had been pimped out by her dad or her grandpa all during her growing up years. She was so traumatized by the time she reached adulthood that she was a sitting duck for anybody who would, any strong male figure that looked like the tough guys she was used to being around. She had no capacity to make those kinds of decisions. And one of the most potent ingredients in and we did not succeed with that family. Like, we didn't get anywhere. They cost us a lot of money. And ultimately, I hope that my mom's involvement in their life was somewhat responsible for helping her to get out of that relationship ultimately, or giving her the courage to do what it took. But what I'm saying is, if hope is the ingredient, I think we could probably all agree that that's one of the things that gives you the ability to make the right choices, because you think that it will make a difference. If that's the ingredient, or a key ingredient, one of the biggest things that gives people hope is having someone else believe in you, knowing that you're valued, even though you haven't done anything to earn it, which is exactly what the scripture says draws our love toward God, because when we were sinners, when we hadn't done anything to earn his love and affection, he died for us. He loved us. Like there was this compassion for us in our down and out, stupid, rebellious state where we were making all the wrong choices and, walking away from him. And yet he comes down, and that's one of the key things in the cross that I don't think we emphasize enough, is that it's Jesus coming down into the very depths of our pain, walking through it with us, and
Right.
and saying, I'm going to bear this. I'm going to bear this. I'm going to take it on myself and carry it for you, because I love you just the way you are. And if you, and when we see the way he loves us, like that's the motivation for us to say, you know what, there's hope. Who I am is not who I always have to be. And
Well,
that's
Anthony,
what I would like to see us be able to reflect as the church consistently, is that sense that you matter, you are valuable just the way you are. You're precious in God's sight, and we love you. And because you have value, it's worth trying harder. It's worth making these choices. It's worth reaching out to God and and believing that there's hope for you.
right. And I agree with all of that. And I absolutely know that I think I need to clarify here. Like I said, we help people at Christmas time. I
Mm-hmm.
give, food, everything, I give things to the poor. But I look at the words sympathy and empathy, and maybe what I more have for the poor in America is not the mentally ill, but the poor, the ones that are sitting out here on the streets, is more of a sympathy, which is more of a thought of as pity. Therefore, I help take care of them. Empathy has more the thought of understanding and understanding them and relating to them and kind of, as Matthew was explaining, his feelings towards them. I think that's more empathy, and I would guess that I lack that empathy. I sympathize with them enough to pity them, to help take care of them, but I don't really empathize with them.
Right.
And I think that's what the difference is for
Yeah.
where I
I
stand.
think
I
that's
pray
a
for
real
them.
distinction.
What was that?
I said, I think that's a real distinction that you're making there. I think that's,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's where I stand, and I'm sure it too is based on my own, my own experiences. And yes, it does take time to get past all that stuff. But I just said, I know two people still sitting down there. It's 40 years later. How long is it going to take? To figure it out. There's a college a tenth of a mile down the street from you. Go to it. It's like, ah. So that just frustrates me. I guess I kind of feel like,
And I recognize that frustration. Like I think any of us who have reached out in to people in that kind of situation have felt that. Like you're banging your head against the wall. Why can't you? But that's where I think that empathy allows us to have the ability to dig in and walk with people in those really dark places, because we realize, like, I mean, this idea there, but for the grace of God, go I, like, that's a real thing.
yeah.
In many cases, we would be making the same decisions if we hadn't had advantages that these people have. And
Oh,
I think
would.
it's worth pointing out as far as political, the political conversation, because of course politics enters into this, that this is one of the things that polarization does to these conversations is, I think in the United States, the two sides of the political aisle on this issue of poverty and a lot of other related issues each have half the truth, and half a truth is often equivalent to a lie. On the left, there's a very strong tendency to say, society and your upbringing and your environment are responsible for where you are now. We have to fix all these structural problems so that people can thrive, and you're not responsible for the problems you're having. Like that's like most people wouldn't put it in that pure a sense, but that's
Right.
where
You're mute.
Did you mute?
I think he's muted. We can't hear you.
Maybe
Wow.
maybe pull the wire.
Anyway, while he's getting that figured out, I'm gonna sign off. It was super nice meeting you. I really enjoyed chatting and stuff. But I gotta teach tomorrow and I'm gonna be dragging.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna need to sign off. I would recommend for like some things that have been changing, and if you're interested in some reading, I'll say it to you, but anybody that's watching, I don't necessarily recommend the site as such, because there's a lot of there's a lot of language on the site, but there's the site crack.com. It's actually kind of a humor site, but they have a bunch of personal experience stories. And if you go to their site and Google the words growing up poor, they have a bunch of things with titles like bad habits you develop when you grow up poor. And it was really eye-opening for me to read somebody's experience, and just somebody who's now successful looking back and saying, this is what messed up my thinking about the way the world worked because I grew up in this kind of situation. Like
Scarcity
he said, even his relationship. Yeah, even like his relationship with the truth. He said, it felt weird to me to tell the truth because I was just raised that you lie about everything. He said, until I was wired to the point where he said the same discomfort that a normal person feels telling the truth, telling a lie. He said, I felt about telling the truth. He said, I would lie about stuff I didn't need to lie about just because it felt weird to tell the truth. And it's just one example. And so anyway, if you're interested in reading that, or people that are watching interested in reading, I recommend him. It's pretty eye-opening for me.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah, I gotta.
We should let you
this
go
has been a
too,
real
Tammy.
marathon.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Thank you so much for coming
terrific.
on.
Thanks so much. Everybody.
Yeah.
It was nice meeting you, David.
And
Yep.
and
all right.
yeah.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night, David.
It's if I sign off, it's not gonna. Somebody else will be host, right?
Should yeah.
I think it should roll over.
All right.
So yeah. Sorry we kept you on so long because the conversation was so good and interesting, as I knew it would be. So thank you.
Well, I'd love to talk about politics some other time.
Yeah,
you can
I
be
really
our local conservasist.
I really wanted to talk to you about Portland and Antifa and things like that, and I think that would be a lot of fun. So maybe another time. And thank you for giving us so much of your time. I know your schedule doesn't have a lot of slots in it. So
well, for you guys, I'm earlier in the evening, right? So that, like he said, he has to teach. Yeah, I do too, but I'm at 7:42. Where he's like facing 10 o'clock. So yeah, it's like, yeah, we didn't get to that. Who knew that we were going to get off on this topic of poverty? But that's that's the way conversations go.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and just I just really appreciate the chance to come on and, debated long and hard whether I wanted to do this or not. Because I have my own private thoughts about the dank kingdom, the dank podcast.
Well,
And,
you've got
I
the dank on you now.
What?
I said you've got the dank on you now. So.
Oh, yeah. And there's family members I'll never live it down with either.
Well, thanks for being courageous about it. And now that you've broken the ice, maybe we'll make it happen again sometime.
Yes, and thank you all for your thoughts.
Yes.
All right.
Appreciate
Well,
it.
signing off. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.